Now we are. Okay. So this is Senate Appropriations, and we're taking testimony from the Commissioner of Taxes, and it's regarding the budget request for that department for the 2022 state budget. And we have with us the Commissioner, and you have some staff with you as well, Commissioner Bolio. So if you want to introduce your staff, and then as you know, the Senate discussion and review of your budget request is not maybe line by line, but more just give us the highlights. And also, I know that we may want to talk to you about all the work that your staff has been doing as it relates to COVID. So I'm going to let you do your budget presentation, which is more, are there certain incentives? We don't want to get into, fee for space and all just the regular, I don't mean it in a negative way, but we understand all that. So if there's something related to either a major savings or a major initiative or whatever, that's really what we'd like. So I'm going to let you take it from there. If you'll just introduce who's with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. I have a number of folks with me today. I have our Deputy Commissioner, Rebecca Samaroff, and she's relatively new in that role, but not new to the department. Folks likely recognize her. She was the Senior Fiscal Analyst for the department for many years and has recently rejoined in this role, and I'm very excited about that. We also have a new Finance Director, and that's Sharon Acey. She is also not new to the department. She's worked for the department for about 12 years. 10 of those years, she was the Director of our Taxpayer Services Division. She's a CPA with private sector experience as well. So a lot of operational knowledge, a lot of tax experience. And I was very excited that she was willing to step into that new challenge on the finance side. And then I have also the CFO and Deputy CFO from AOA. So Holly Anderson is the CFO and Brenda Berry is the Deputy CFO. And they are really instrumental in the work that we're doing, making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and making sure everything's submitted on time. And I would start with a big thank you to this team for helping prep the budget. As this committee knows very well, it's a difficult process, but every year I think that we work well and we'll be proposing a responsible budget here. Mm-hmm. If it works for you, Madam Chair, what I'd like to do for the order is just talk about some of the highlights of our year, some of the things we've been working on, and then the big hits from the ups and downs, and throw it to you folks for questions. If
that sounds fine. That sounds fine.
Right. Chrissy, I think you were going to screen share for me. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. I'll pull it right up for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll start on page 4, please. Thank you. Yep, perfect right there. So yeah, I think our budget is boring in some ways. If you look at
and we do love boring.
Well, then happy to hit the mark for you there, Madam Chair.
But we also value and recognize the importance of the role that the department plays in the revenue picture. So please go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate that very much. The first thing that I always like to highlight is the pie chart. And if you look at that, you'll notice that there are two things that really stick out, right? The blue part, which is our people, and the orange part, which is our computers. And just between the two of those categories, you're at 88% of our budget. If you look at the fee and, space fee and other internal services, that's another 6%. Postage and printing is about 4%, a little over $750,000. And that represents $750,000 to $1 million letters going out every year. It's a little less than $1 a letter, which really means that any given year, we've got about $500,000 of any kind of discretionary funding that we can play with. So it can be challenging as we make the budget each year when there are pressures. But I do think that, our two biggest assets, people and computers, we have a very robust processing system in VTax. It has been a tremendous success, transformed the way that the department does business. And we pair very talented and dedicated staff to work with that. And I think have been hitting the mark as a successful department. As we look at what COVID-19 did to the department, we're not unique. Many state agencies and businesses and other organizations were dealing with the same things we were dealing with, which was changing how we did our work, and in many cases, changing the work that we did. So on the front of changing how we did our work, about 85% of the department staff have been working remotely since last March. When the governor sent out the emergency order and said, if you can work remotely, you should be working remotely. And that meant that out of 150 staff that we have, about 135 on a given day are working remotely. Most of the folks who are working in the office have been doing so throughout the entire pandemic. And most of those are actually in Sharon's shop in the revenue processing section. So they're opening mail, they're batching paper tax returns, they're scanning them into the system for processing, cashing paper checks, all of that kind of stuff. And we have a limited number of staff throughout the building in different areas handling mail and other tasks that can't be completed remotely. But almost all of our tax processors, examiners are working remotely. Our call center is almost exclusively remote. If you call the tax department for help right now, you're almost certainly talking to somebody in their own home on their own cell phone. We also took on different kinds of work that we don't have experience with. And the biggest piece of that was administering 4 grant programs from the federal CRF money. The largest and most public of which was probably the program that we did in partnership with ACCD, which was the economic recovery grants. And there were several rounds to that. Throughout all of the rounds, that was a $300 million grant program that went out to Vermont businesses in need. The tax department itself issued just under 200 million of that. We also had the land records digitization grants, which was for municipalities to be able to digitize land records. That was a really great program. We had over 100 applicants, 100 successful applicants. And our research had indicated that before that program launched, only about 25% of Vermont towns had some kind of access to digitized land records. So this was a huge win. I mean, some towns did a few years, but some towns did 40 years of records, and really are going to be greatly expanding access to those and transparency, which was great to see. The local government expense reimbursement had over 100 applicants as well, and was for all COVID-19 related qualifying expenses, PPE, retrofitting to buildings, hazard pay, things like that could qualify. And I think we ended up paying out about $7.5 million on that. And then the independent college grants, which was a $10 million program to 11 independent colleges. And so all in all, we issued over 200 million. My slide is actually wrong. We issued over $200 million just for my department in federal grants. And I've just got to say, I'm extremely proud of the work that my staff did on that. We are not an agency that gets federal money, that handles federal money, or that gives out federal money. We're also not an agency that has a lot of experience with grants. We do have some grants for municipalities, but they tend to be pretty small potatoes. So for us to be able to transition to this, to stand up the programs in the amount of time that we would need to stand them up, normally if we had a new program to stand up, we would ask for 9 to 12 months. We turn these around in 4 to 6 weeks, right? And we did so, again, as everybody was dealing with the pandemic in their personal and professional lives, and we were working remotely. So I'm extremely proud of that. I've tried to stress to my staff that they should be extremely proud of that, and I think that they are. Other things that we don't, oh, sorry.
I just want to say, I thought the work done was really incredible. I had, of course, this committee initiated the bill that did the funding of the CRF to local government, and so it was really great to see that how it was able to help local government, and included in that, of course, was the money that allowed the digitization of records, which turned out I could never have anticipated how what the take up would have been on that. So it was a lot of work, and appreciate the great effort to be responsive, and some of the things that came up you never would have anticipated. So it was a tremendous effort on your staff's part, and I just think we should thank them because they did a great job.
Yeah, I totally agree, Madam Chair, and I appreciate those kind words. It was absolutely a team effort. Throughout the whole pandemic, my staff have really focused on how to serve Vermonters and serve their community. They've had a do whatever needs to be done attitude, point us in the direction that you need taken care of, and we'll do it. And that has really been reflected in these outcomes.
Yeah.
And total agreement on the digitization. We never, I don't know if we ever imagined over 100 successful applicants. So that was just really cool to see. Other items
And
that
I'm
we dealt with.
thinking that, Craig, with the additional money now with the rescue plan, with so much going out to towns, that will be another resource to help um, for the towns either that have more to do or didn't start, that it gives resources to assist towns in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know all the details on that. There's a lot to unpack in that bill, but certainly there are a lot of other resources coming to Vermont in a variety of ways, and excited to see how those all get reflected and helping folks out. This committee likely remembers as well that the due date was extended for tax season last year, which had some impact on our department. When the feds extend the due date by Vermont law, it also extends Vermont income taxes. So that not only extended the personal income tax due date to July 15th, but also the corporate income tax due date and some other income taxes. It's interesting that really, it sounds so simple to do that, right? You just extend the due date for 3 months, but there's really a lot of impacts to that. One is just programming it, right? So you think, okay, well, we move one date to another, but not every corporation files with a calendar year fiscal year, right? So as their extended payment due dates are extended, it also changes other dates in the system. And it also really had the impact of stretching out the tax season, which had
It
a big
also made revenue forecasting very difficult.
revenue forecasting, the end of the year CAFR items were challenging. But normally we deal with a tax season that's ramping up right now through the February and March timeline, sort of crescendos in April when we get to April 15th and get the last major glut of unextended returns. And then we start to work through those backlogs, right, over the course of May and June. And by the time we hit July and we issue property tax credits, it's not that our work is done, but we have some breathing room. Right. So to have extended that through to July 15th last year, it might have slightly reduced the intensity of the months leading up to July 15th, but it really stretched the tail out. And so that's one of the things that I've been really focused on for my staff and my department is just the fatigue factor as well, right? We've been sprinting to do the grants. We've been sprinting to get through a tax season that was extended. And now we're going into another tax season. So really just focusing on making sure people are taking care of themselves, making sure they're taking breaks, taking time off, which can be a challenge because people don't necessarily want to take time off if they don't travel, but really making sure that they're getting that recharge. And then in the middle of all of this, maybe crazily, we decided to continue with the project that we had scheduled before the pandemic hit, which was to upgrade the version for our VTAX system. So we've invested a lot of money into the VTAX system, and we patch it twice a year with smaller upgrades. And every few years, we have an opportunity to do a larger version upgrade. And I liken it just to the same way that Windows gets updates or Microsoft Office gets updates. We do the same kind of thing to the system. And the version upgrades are really like year-long projects that require a lot of folks for testing, for review. And we launched that in the middle of all of this as well. So we've also been, we get some new features from that. And there's always some bumps that come with a new version. And so we've also been working through that. But very, again, proud that we were able to be able to do that in the midst of all of this other stuff that we took on and still hit our service metrics. And what we have coming up this year is what I'm sure to be a challenging tax season. And even when I made these slides, I had no idea the other stuff that would be added to our plate, right? There's some exciting features in the latest stimulus bill that impact tax year 20, right? Just the UI exemption is probably the largest one that folks have thought about that impacts the state. We also have two implementations on our radar. So the first is the renter credit, formerly known as the renter rebate. That was a really big reform that went through last year that we were really excited about. That is a program that has been just sort of talked about as ripe for reform for many years. And last year we came together, the administration, legislature, and advocates came together with a new way to do that program that I think fills a lot of the holes in the policy elements of it, and is also going to make it a lot easier to file and a lot easier to administer. But the one thing that we did ask for last year was a 1-year delay on the effective date. So it's effective for tax year 21, which means those filings will come in next spring. So we're going to take this year to program our systems to be ready for that reform, and also do outreach and make sure that folks know what the new program is, what the new rules are, and aware of it. And with cannabis, the sale of cannabis becoming legal, there was also a cannabis excise tax as part of that bill, S54, maybe Act 165, that we'll have to implement. And so we'll also do that this year. And then just other things that come up that we need to handle as part of the response to the pandemic. So we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us still. But again, given that I feel like so far we've been successful in our response to the pandemic and hitting our marks on service levels, I'm confident that we'll do so again. And I'm happy to pause there for slides, and also happy to move on to the next slide.
Sure. Well, it's been a very busy year, and I think this kind of summarizes it. So we can move on to the next slide unless there are questions. Otherwise, we can. All right. We would agree with all of that. Is there a money slide that we're going to look at, or?
Yeah, the next one is, and I'm happy to skip this one. I'd be very brief here if you're okay with it, Madam Chair. I'm also happy to skip.
Well, I like that, the best government service in the state, because boy, the tax man is historically has suffered from. It's a tough role to have.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's really my vision for the department. The two tenets that you see there under the vision. The best government service in the state to me means a customer service oriented department. It means operating with integrity, really being a model for our fellow state agencies. And I also really strive to be recognized as the best place to work in state government. And that means different things to different people, right? That might mean most fulfilling. That might mean most fun. That might mean most efficient. And I say that we need to strive for all of the above, right? And I'm not naive that culture is never a job that's done. You never say, great, my workplace culture work is done. It's always an ongoing operation. And so we're always striving to be better. And the only other thing that I would really highlight on this slide is that I've really asked my staff to focus on the first 3 words of our mission, which is to serve Vermonters, and do what needs to be done to do that. And boy, have they risen to that challenge. So I just really like to stress this mission and this vision to staff, and they've really bought in. Happy to take next slide. Thanks, Christy. So we're really getting into the meat and potatoes of this now. So this is our ups and downs.
And it is boring, isn't it,
It is absolutely boring, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go through briefly, and I'm going to highlight, I think, a couple of these lines. But the first one is $323,000. That was the appropriation we got for our operating budget from the CRF. So now that that's gone, we're transitioning that back to the general fund. Mm-hmm. Second line is the normal salary and benefit pressures that we would get in a year. Yeah. There's a modest increase to our ADS SLA on the third line, modest decrease to the agency fee, standard internal service fund pressures at $110,000. So really the last 2 lines that I want to focus on. The first is that we're proposing a $100,000 reduction in our temporary staffing budget. And there's a few reasons for this. Currently in our budget, our temp staffing, it's just baked into our salaries and benefits. But in our internal documents, we have it at about $370,000. And there's 3 reasons that we're proposing the reduction. The first is that it's challenging right now to hire the number of temps that we would normally hire. The work that we do is confidential and needs to remain confidential. And so it's difficult to take new temporary staff that we're not familiar with and have them start working remotely. But it's also difficult because we don't want to increase our in-office presence. So we've really focused on hiring temporary staff this year that are returning staff and that we're familiar with. A lot of our temps, we feel very lucky to be in this situation. A lot of our temps are retired tax department employees, and they come back every year. They want to work for a few months, and then they want to go do whatever they want for the rest of the year. And we're totally fine with that because we appreciate their expertise in times of the tax season. So that's the first piece, is that we're just not going to be able to hire as much. But the second piece is that it's a path that started before the pandemic, but has been amplified by the pandemic, which is that we're really undergoing a structural reform at the department to knock down more silos, have more interdivisional cooperation and intra-divisional cooperation, so that we rely less on temporary staff anyway. And so a great example of that is we have desk auditors in the compliance division who do very similar work to the tax examiners in the taxpayer services division. And we usually take on a lighter workload in the office audit division around this time of the year because we want to let tax preparers and taxpayers focus on filing new tax returns. And then we scale up office audit work through the summer and fall, which means that office audit right now in a normal year would have a little capacity to take on additional work. So we've focused on cross-training. VTax has been tremendously successful with that because everything is now in one system, and having office audit staff and other staff help support taxpayer services and revenue processing that experience the most seasonality to their work. And then the third thing is that we've again felt fortunate, and we've also worked really hard to achieve these outcomes, but there is a distinct trend, certainly over the last 20 years and even over the last 10 and 5, where we continue to see more and more electronic filing.
Oh, yeah.
And there are few things that are better for our department operationally than taxpayers filing electronically. It gets to us faster. It reduces the chance of typos. It cuts down on the amount of labor that we need to get it into the system. And so as we get more and more electronic filing, that also reduces our need for temporary employees. And in addition to that, because we have fewer issues brought on by paper filing, and just because people have gotten more comfortable as VTax has been around longer and using the features of that, we also have a very distinct trend over the last several years of fewer and fewer phone calls coming into the department's call center. And surprisingly, that trend continues even this year, which is a more complicated year where folks may have unusual situations, and yet still we see fewer calls so far this year than we saw at this point last year. And that has a tremendous impact on cutting down the number of temporary staff that we need. So I say all of that to say, we're proposing a $100,000 reduction in our temporary staffing because we will not spend $370,000 on temps this year. But I also want to be clear to the committee, I do not envision that I'm coming back next year and restoring this and saying we need that now. I think that these structural reforms that we're putting in and these trends that we're seeing mean that this would be a permanent reduction in our need for temporary staffing.
Okay.
I'm happy to pause there before I go to the next item if there are any questions.
I think any questions? I think obviously e-filing has made such a big difference. It's just incredible when I think about it. So questions? Otherwise, we can move. Is there another slide here?
The only other slides that I have, I think, are getting into our performance metrics, and I'm happy to talk about that, or if the committee's good, I'm happy to stop.
I think, obviously your budget's pretty straightforward, and other questions? Yes, Senator Starr. You're muted, and it looks like you're enjoying an afternoon snack while the rest of us are.
That was good too. I was just wondering, you must take money in, right? And I'm wondering, how are the revenues coming in compared to a normal year?
Well, I could hardly call this a normal year, Senator.
No.
One of the trends that we've seen that I do think is significant and maybe of interest to the committee is we have tens of thousands fewer tax returns that we normally have at this time of the year. Normally, this time of the year, we'd have about 160,000 personal income tax returns. That's what we had this time last year. We get about 400,000 a year throughout the filing season. We have just over 100,000 this year. And I really chalk that up to two reasons. One is the IRS opened later than any of us had ever seen. They opened on February 12th, which meant we opened on February 12th, which was several weeks later than we would normally open. And also with the Department of Labor 1099-G issues and folks just getting the corrected documents within the last week or two, I think that's also creating a delay in filing, especially because that was 100,000 taxpayers. So we're monitoring to see if it picks up over the next few weeks, but definitely a significant decline from where we would normally be at this point.
Be done.
Other questions? So from a budget perspective, it's pretty straightforward. appreciate your explanation and the work, and also the efforts you initiated. Really, you're talking about cross training so that you're getting the greatest use of all your employees. So that's always good to hear. I don't know whether committee members have any other questions. We just know you've been so preoccupied with all the additional work that's come your way, and appreciate you still been able to continue and move forward with your upgrade, with your tax modernization system. So other questions of the commissioner or staff other than, okay. Well, I just want to tell you, Craig, when you're talking about taxes and of course the role, and there is a Sumerian civilization, which was quite a long time ago. One of the quotes was, you can have your king, you can have your lord, you can have your king, but the one to fear is the tax man. So this attitude toward tax collection and, the difficult role is very, very old. So
Yeah, I appreciate that, Madam Chair. When we were able to do the Capital for a Day, the governor's initiative, when we were going around and talking with different Vermonters, I had put on a presentation that was titled Your Friendly Neighborhood Tax Department. And it usually got a chuckle, but it really is something that is I'm passionate about, that taxes are the largest voluntary reporting system the government has ever set up, right? In our department alone, 97% of the money comes in voluntarily. Only 3% comes in from our active work of the compliance division. And our compliance division is working very hard. It's not 3% because they're slouching. So I feel very passionately that our job is to make it clear what you have to do, stand up the systems to file, and help people out when they get stuck. Because most people want to do the right thing.
And I think it's the attitude that they feel, assisted as opposed to a kind of an adversarial. So I think that has probably helped with the staff you have, who the customer service end of things as well. So it's other. Bobby, you have another question?
You don't think that's because us in the legislature are doing such a good job that everybody's happy and willing to pay their taxes to keep us going?
I think the commissioner will probably plead the fifth on that one.
We're all working together. We're all working together.
That's true. And that's what makes it all work, if we all work together.
That's right.
So I'm going to, I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead.
Well, did you want me to talk about the link up at all, Madam Chair, or are you guys good with that?
I'm going to, well, we're going to obviously defer to our chair of finance to say that they agree with the language. But if you want to just take a minute to explain what is creating the need for the language, it'd probably be helpful, because people need to know how you're proposing to deal with those federal policy changes and the impact on Vermont.
Yeah, so again, so many things have been odd this year, and this is no different. Vermont normally passes what's called the link up to the Internal Revenue Code retroactively every year. So right now, the legislature is talking about linking up to the tax year 20 laws at the federal level, and tax year 20 is what everybody's filing right now for tax returns. The CARES Act and the subsequent bill in December had some pretty large tax impacts. One of the largest that folks have been asking about is the Paycheck Protection Program, and those loans that got forgiven, converted into grants. They are not taxable at the federal level. And then the bill in December also clarified that you could also deduct expenses with that income. And both of those provisions require the state of Vermont to link up. The taxability provision requires the state of Vermont to link up to the federal tax code to do that. So the language for that is in H315, which is the COVID-19 relief bill.
And that's the bill we have right here in our committee.
Yep. One other thing that is worth noting, Madam Chair, is that the language in that bill links up to the IRC through 12/31/20, which means these other provisions that just came from the American Rescue Plan would require a change to that language or a separate link up if the state wished to take on those other things, such as the exemption for UI.
Okay. So are you saying that we need to modify what's in there, or that we have additional policy decisions to make relative to the treatment of those revenue sources in our own tax policy?
Yeah, I think if the legislature wishes for some of those other provisions of the latest bill to become part of Vermont law, you'd have to adjust the language that's in 315 or pass different language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. So I appreciate your coming. I think we're all set in terms of your budget request, and appreciate your staff coming here today as well. If we have any questions or anything else comes up, we'll obviously be in touch. So
Absolutely. Thank you all for the time. It's always great to see you all.
thank you. We'll